Hey guys, Anthony here. Today we have a really fun conversation with Cole Napper. Cole is the VP of People Analytics at Orgnostics, and he's the co-host of the Directionally Correct podcast. I really love this conversation because Cole shares the fulfillment he found in becoming a father, and we talk about how parenting has a bit of a bad brand out there. We also talk about why work-life balance might not be necessary. Interesting stuff. I appreciate you listening. If you would click the follow button, leave me a rating. That'd mean the world to me. It's the best way to help grow the podcast. Anyway, on to the show. Welcome back to the Successful Working Parents Podcast, the podcast where we talk to successful working parents. We are still working on the title, but we feel good about it. My guest today, he is the VP of People Analytics at Orgnostics. He's the co-host of Directionally Correct, the #1 People Analytics podcast, father of 2. Ladies and gentlemen, Cole Napper. Cole, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I wish I would have known the name before I joined. I always said, I'm a working parent, not a successful working parent.
Well, we'll let the audience be the judge of that by the end of this conversation. How about that?
Sounds good.
So usually we just start off with a little background on your career. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So I have a background in the discipline of industrial organizational psychology. I've got a master's and a PhD in that. A lot of people with that type of background go into academia, but actually went into the workplace. So kind of worked my way up through what's now called people analytics functions, mostly at Fortune 500 type companies earlier in my career. Then in the pandemic, kind of switched into the startup space. And I'm sure we'll probably get into that in a little bit because that kind of relates to some parenting decisions as well. And then most recently, moved from being kind of a person who's like doing this for a company to a person who works for a vendor who sells this type of technology to companies. And that's been a big career transition for me, as well as you mentioned the podcast earlier. A little over a year ago, started the podcast, and I've also been writing a lot of articles almost for about 2 years now. And that's kind of been a new foray as well of getting my name out there in the world. Like I felt like I was doing really great work in the big organizations I was a part of, but I wasn't very well known because I didn't have much of an exterior presence. And so that's definitely been something that I've leaned into the last few years, as well as learned a lot through the process.
Great. And how about your role as father?
My role as a father. Well, it's kind of strange to talk about this publicly because I'm actually on my podcast very, very private about my parenting just because I don't know. I don't want like some serial killer to come out and like take my family's life or something like that.
Okay.
But I mean it.
I won't dox you in my show notes.
Yeah. But I mean, it's great. So I've got 2 children that are younger in age and both kind of daycare age kids, and 1 boy, 1 girl. And I don't know, man. Like it's been, it really like parenting really changes you. I know you kind of hear that sort of
Yeah.
tritely, but it definitely made me not just revisit my priorities on life and myself, but also on my career. And I don't know. This is cheesy, but I just love having little kids. They're such a joy to be around. They're a big challenge, and a lot of people complain about being parents. But gosh, man, like I have never been so one track oriented towards having a purpose of like taking care of my wife, taking care of my kids than I ever felt before I had children. I always kind of felt adrift, and so being a parent is definitely a big joy and a big motivator for me.
Hey man, I couldn't agree more. I think you're on a good track here so far with your concerns of what people would think of your parenting. So far, I think you're saying some good stuff. So we'll see. We'll see what comes
Well,
next.
we're early in the podcast.
So do you think that your background in people analytics informs the way that you're a parent at all?
I would have thought that. But one of the things that I figured out being a parent, because it's not just having a background in people analytics or a background in psychology, but I would say more having a background in science. And having a background in science, you think that like you could go learn a lot of like how to do something from like a book that tells you how to do it. And the thing that you realize when you become a parent is like, I say it's kind of like diets where I mean, there's a million different diets out there, and you can find a diet that says, yeah, you can eat ice cream all day and you'll lose weight. That
Mhm.
doesn't mean it's the right diet.
Yeah. Right.
And so there's so much stuff out there about parenting. It's really, really difficult to know what works and what doesn't work. And so the thing that I found through being a parent is, man, every kid is different. Like they're just very different. And so you've got to just kind of, in some ways, just kind of wing it to do what's right for your kid, not just what like a book tells you to do, but you really just gotta, I don't know, just like love your kids first and then, try to figure it out second, I guess.
Yeah. You mentioned maybe some changes in career, moving into the startup world, being related to being a parent. Curious to hear what that's about.
Yeah, like when so it was just my son was really little when the pandemic happened, and he was my first child, um and then so I went remotely for the first time. And what that showed me was I didn't realize how much I was missing out on. Like I was always in an office. I had a pretty decent commute both to and from work every day. And so we we had made the decision for both of our children when they were very little. And my wife works from home, and so she's been like she was an early adopter to working from home. So she's been doing it for a long time, and she had this joy of being able to kind of work from home and stay with the kids. But we had also had a nanny. And the thing that I realized, like, man, when you work from home and your kids are around, like, first of all, it's kind of chaotic, but especially if you don't have a good like home setup and everything. But you miss out on so much of their development and so much of just like the little things, like, and in a way, I mean, I know the pandemic destroyed like a lot of lives and had a lot of bad havoc on the world, but that was such a blessing for me once. So seeing my son grow up, and then once my daughter was born as well, I got to be there from the very beginning of just seeing her grow up. And so we both of the kids for over a year, we had a nanny and had them just in the house. And then we eventually put them into daycare because we want them to get like a little other socialization from other kids, because it's you kind of you don't want them to like grow up and not know how to play well with others and everything. But that was really a blessing for us. And that I mean, working from I would say dispositionally I'm more of the type of person that wants to interact with other people, and so working from home was definitely a challenge for me on like just like not getting enough interaction with other human beings and adults and stuff. But I definitely from a parenting standpoint, it has, I if I could do it over again, I would do it exactly. I would hope that I could work from home exactly the same.
Oh yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I have had a kid recently, and being able to work from home this whole time has made a huge difference. And even just not having a commute, right? That's like 30 extra minutes at the beginning and end of the day that you get with them, and you're able, even if you're just stepping out for a minute to get a drink, you see them for 5 extra minutes. Like it's really great, and I couldn't imagine if I'm gone from 8 to 6 or whatever every day.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel the same way.
So then, when did you start um, Directionally Correct?
So I started that. When did I start that? So I started. I kind of here. This is it. So I made a New Year's resolution in 2022 that I had a lot of ideas that I wanted to kind of put myself out there, right? And so I was like, all right, I'm gonna make a New Year's resolution. I'm gonna write one article, and one article, I just couldn't. It was like I was, vomiting with my hands. Like I just kept writing and writing and writing. One article turned into 8 articles. And so I published for 8 weeks straight, 8 articles. And because of that, I started getting invited onto some other people's podcasts. And I'd never been on a podcast before as a guest. And a friend of mine who used to live near me, who had moved away to a different city, reached out. His name's Scott. He's my co-host now. He's like, dude, you're awesome on these podcasts. We should start a podcast together. And I was like, whatever. But we used to hang out all the time, and since he had moved away, we had started having these Zoom calls with one another. We're like, you know, these are really interesting conversations. We could record these, and I bet you people would listen. And so probably, I can't remember exactly when in 2022, but it was sometime, maybe like May-ish timeframe. we started the podcast. We launched 3 episodes of just him and I talking to each other before we ever had a guest. And it kind of just blew up from there. It's like, wow, people really like the authenticity we were bringing, because there's a lot of content out there about really technical subjects like people analytics, but there's not a lot of content that's very like humorous or down to earth or authentic. It's all very like academic and kind of very
Sure.
dry. And so it had a different feel, and I think that it definitely filled a market niche that hadn't existed before then.
Yeah. I mean, I can definitely relate to like wanting to put more stuff out there. I think a lot of people listening can. And this is also interesting because you want to put stuff out there in your profession. You're not like you want to start like making like dancing TikTok content, right? Like you
I
want
mean,
to put out
different strokes for different folks, man. You know,
if you
I'm
want to
not
start doing
much
that,
of a
that's fine
dancer,
too.
but I'm sure there's some people that like that.
If you want to do that, that's fine too. I'm just saying I think it's interesting when somebody wants to make content, but it's just really related to their professional
Yeah.
career. It's not like a separate side gig necessarily. And it can be hard to do that. Did you have any issues with actually like putting yourself out there and, pressing publish, or did you feel pretty confident with what you were doing?
Oh, I was terrified to put out the first article. The podcast wasn't terrifying. What it was is the thing we figured out, we had to like really unlearn this, is the second that record button goes on, you start sounding like a radio host. Like, hi, I'm Cole Napper. Nice to meet you. It's like, dude, we're friends. What are you talking about? You know, like,
Right.
why does it sound so weird?
Yeah.
And you had to like really train yourself out of that, because I guess you just know that the record button on and the little red light is blinking, and that just kind of, I don't know, kind of scares you a little bit. But yeah, you really like it takes a lot of repetitions really to kind of get good at this, and I would say we're just now starting to get there. Like, a lot of people listen to a really shitty podcast for a
Yeah.
long time. It's like we're getting better now. We're still not at the, we're still not all the way there for sure.
Yeah, totally. I can relate to that. So, all right. So you have a full-time job, you got a podcast, you got 2 kids, you have a wife. How do you balance it all, or how do you kind of fit it all into the day?
I mean, I kind of don't. I don't know. Like,
That's okay
that's the
too.
nature. Like, I think I made a post about this a while back, but like, I don't really know where my work ends and my life begins, and vice versa. Right. And the reason why, when you work from home, like, one dynamic is I work from home. The other dynamic is just kind of my two roles at work. Like, my job is very externally facing. And so I do a lot of stuff on like social media, a lot of live events, a lot of traveling, a lot of hosting type of things. And so it's very much like interwoven with friendships, but it's also work, and it's also talking to people. And so it kind of like, it's very ambiguous sometimes, like what is work and what is just living my life. And the same thing with the podcast. Usually I'm talking to people who already have established relationships with, but it's also got like sponsors and things like that. So it's very kind of ambiguous. And then you layer that on, like, if you're working from home, it's really hard to know, like, if you're getting notifications on your phone from like Slack or emails, or people are calling you or texting you, and like, when does work actually end? you know?
Yeah, good question.
And so I haven't figured out. I know some people do a really good job of like setting boundaries. Like, dispositionally, I've never been a person who was like, I don't enjoy vacations. I know that sounds crazy to say, but like, I feel like every time I go on a vacation, something bad happens. So I just, and I don't really get that burnout feeling that I think a lot of people feel at work. And so it doesn't really bother me. What I do miss, I haven't got to do much lately. Like, my little slice of heaven was going and playing golf. I like getting in the outdoors. I like having, 2 or 4 hours where it's just like, one track focus on something. Like, I had a rule like where I wouldn't bring my cell phone with me on the course. And so it was very, very kind of a Zen thing. I haven't played since, I think, March of this year. So I think I'm jonesing a little bit for that Zen feeling. I felt it a little bit, but that's my one kind of slice of heaven where I really kind of unplug from things.
Do you like, or do you just not mind that you have sort of this blend, or do you wish that there was more of a hard line between work and non-work?
I'm, I mean, I have mixed and complicated feelings about this. I'd say for the most part, I know myself, and the biggest thing that I know is I crave variety. Like some people really frame this as like, oh, you got to be a really flexible person. I'm not really super flexible. What I do crave is I really like having a bunch of different stuff to look forward to going on, a lot of balls in the air. It's just something that's really motivating for me. And so it doesn't really come up because the when I feel, not good about work is when I'm bored. God, being bored is the worst.
Yeah.
Like I can't handle being bored. I can't handle having nothing going on. And so I gotta have some action or I start getting really restless.
Yeah. I mean, I similarly like to or don't mind having that blend. Like I feel like if I'm doing a little bit of work all the time, then it's never overwhelming. It's never like I hit a point where I have to slam my laptop shut. Like I'll, answer a few emails when I'm on vacation and things like that. And I'm sure people would say it's good to like fully disconnect, but I find it easier to manage my job if I'm always like a little on and then
Yeah.
therefore never like overwhelmingly on.
We tried to do like I said like vacations, I feel like bad things always happen. We tried to do like one of these like disconnect vacations. So we rented a house like out in the mountains in Colorado, completely off the grid for like a week. And 2 days in we came home. Like we
Because
just
just like it
like
was just disastrous or boring or for why?
yeah, it was disastrous, boring. We all got sick. Like, like it was just like, this is not our wavelength. This isn't our lifestyle. We're just not ready. So we just came home and then took like a little like day long staycation and then just got back to work.
Yeah. Well, you think having Wi-Fi would have made you guys not get sick?
I don't know, man. I don't know if it was like psychosomatic or if it was just like bed bugs or something, but
Right.
it was not enjoyable.
Yeah, that's fair. So you mentioned liking to golf and that being something that you haven't done as much as you like to. Do you have any strategies for carving out some time for yourself? Maybe it's not 4 hours for golf, but do you do anything for self-care that's been helpful?
I mean, I get up before my kids do in the morning.
Yeah.
That helps. We just recently moved. First of all, just kind of for peace of mind, because again, we didn't really actually have a very good home set up at our old house for two people to be working from home,
Hmm.
and so now we actually have two dedicated workspaces, which helps, and this kind of doubles as a podcast studio too, which is kind of nice.
Yeah.
Um, but as a part of that, that's I've been doing these like early morning runs, like before the sun comes up. And I've really been enjoying that. That's like a new addition. Like I used to go run in the mornings, but it was always like after the sun came up, and it was kind of a hassle getting ready in the mornings and everything with the kids. But it's before like the whole house is quiet. No, I'm not disturbing anybody, and it's kind of like a little bit of me time, but
Hmm.
also exercising and not like I'm not going to die when I'm 50. Hopefully, knock on wood. So that's been a good thing.
That's early, right? What time does the sun get up? Like 6, 5:30?
Yeah, I mean it changed. We in the middle of summer is the easiest because those are the longest days of the year or whatever.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think it's probably like 6:30 ish right now. Maybe I don't actually follow it.
Okay. That's up there, but that's to me, even if it's before your kids are up, just like working out early in the morning is the best way to get it out of the way and set your day up for success.
Well, that's one of my things. Like sometimes I talk to people, are you a night working out person or a morning working out person? Like before I had a family and kids, I was a night working out person for sure.
Mhm.
Like, and I could never see myself being a morning working out person. But once you have a family and kids, I I am so exhausted by the end of the day. I could never work out at night.
Yeah, I couldn't see that either. And I think also like there's just stuff to do after work, right? I think that's as you get
Yeah,
older, you have like different responsibilities, and I think you don't have the luxury of just hitting the gym from 6 to 7 or whatever.
yeah. And I just don't want to be like sweating when I go to bed. That seems weird now.
Yeah, that too. Well, you could always shower, I guess, if you
Yeah.
if you're concerned about that, right? Um, what about any like sacrifices you had to make while you've juggled work and family, or it sounds like you've leaned more heavily on making sure your family is the priority number one.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's like the counterfactual of like things that if I didn't put my family first, that maybe I don't know, maybe I'd be making more money right now or something like that. I don't know. But I kind of don't care. Like I mean, you hear people like the YOLO type lifestyle. You only live once. Well, I kind of have the same thought, but kind of a different conclusion than a lot of people. Like, I think the YOLO type people are like, oh yeah, we're gonna go to Burning Man. Doesn't matter if we have zero in our bank account. Like that's. But I think about like I'm only gonna have small children once. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
I'm only gonna get to do this once, and so if I'm gonna do it, I really want to like make the most of it and get the most joy out of life.
Yeah. I love that. I mean, you mentioned earlier also just like your priority shifting. Like I think I was almost looking forward to having a kid because I was looking forward to having like a clearer focus and like priority, and it really does put everything else into perspective, and it makes you feel like this
Yeah.
is a very clear thing that it should have my focus and does, and it makes it easy to figure out what else, where your priorities are.
Well, I'll say this, like, and you this in that way, you and I are very different. Like, I don't know, in my world, before having children, having kids has a really bad brand out there. Like, I was
Yeah.
afraid,
Yeah.
had trepidation about it. Like every rom com TV show like makes it seem like having kids is miserable, and all this kind of stuff. And I feel like I was really concerned about it, and I guess if I had to put a PSA out there about having children, just freaking do it. It's awesome,
Yeah.
you
No,
know.
I love that. I mean, I've been trying to say that it's not. I feel like people make it seem like it's going to be so hard, and I don't want to make it sound like I'm saying it's easy because it's not easy, but it's not as hard as everybody makes it sound, and it's great. I think that the rewards far outweigh the struggles of it. And I was like you too. Like in my 20s, I definitely didn't want to have kids. I think we're the same age, but I didn't have my child till I was 35. So in my in those last few years, like when I was 32,
Hmm.
33, that's when I started to be like, actually, I think this would be a really nice focus for my life. But there was definitely a time when I was like not sure if I wanted them at all. And I think the word on the street is that it's not fun.
It's not just it's not fun. It's like I don't know. People just make it seem like it's like there's nothing good about it, and I was like, my experience has been there's almost everything is good about it. Not and it's not just for the kids, it's for you too. Like for your own peace of mind. Like I almost kind of feel like, and I don't know if this is a radical belief or whatever, but I kind of feel like you're like there's almost like you're not experiencing the whole human experience if you don't have children. Like there's like an empty part of your heart that's never going to get filled if you haven't had that. And I know some people can't have kids and everything, and like I really feel for that and everything. But like, man, it's definitely there's like some kind of like evolutionary trigger that goes off, and you're like, okay, this is what I should be doing.
Yeah. No, it definitely unlocks a new part of your heart and your mind for sure. I think it's really
Yeah,
I highly recommend it. Anybody out there who hasn't had a kid yet, I highly recommend it.
I'm sure that's probably not the core audience of your podcast, but
Yeah, I don't know if the core audience is trepidatious about having kids, but in case a few of my friends are just listening just for fun or something, they're
yeah.
never too late. Um, any other tips for a busy working parent that you want to make sure you share?
Yeah, I mean, the funny part is just by this kind of goes full circle back to the people analytics in my career. I've actually done a lot of like people analytics teams actually study this at for employees that work for an employer. Like if you're trying to understand as an employer what is going to motivate your employees, what's going to help retain your employees, what's going to increase their loyalty to your company. I've been a part of companies that were making decisions for like should we have on-site childcare or not, and what are the pros, what are the cons, what is this going to do, is it going to pay for itself by retaining some of our talented people, and so I've actually looked into this quite a bit on the work front, and this is why I know I'm quite different than I think a lot of people is I would just say that a lot of people really like it's about finding their boundaries, right? If you can find, and arguably it is very much easier to do that if you have an in-person job, right? Finding your, because it's usually when you get in the car and the engine turns on, you're like, okay, boundary set,
Yeah.
right? But I think for the we live in a really kind of a strange world where there's a lot of like hybrid work, there's a lot of remote work, there's a lot of like, okay, the traditional norms about how people work have changed quite considerably, And as a consequence of that, it's it is tough for people. And I would say, I think everybody's kind of got to know their limit or discover their limit. Like, I think everybody just assumes that you like, oh, I'm this like soothsayer. I have all this wisdom. And I just know all of my boundaries beforehand. I think it's about trying to discover what they are and being very intentional about it. Because, I mean, there are a lot of really well adjusted people out there that just kind of know this stuff. But I think a lot of people, it's more of a gray area and you have to figure it out for yourself.
Mm. Did starting the podcast cut into, well, obviously cut into your time, but did that cut into your personal time? Did it like, how do you shave off the time in your day to dedicate to the podcast? Because I assume that's a decent amount of
Yeah,
time
I mean,
a week.
it's that's hard to say. Like we Scott and I made this rule that if it ever stopped being fun, we would just quit.
It's a good
And
rule.
so, like, I think when you go in with the right mentality, it's not work, right? It's hard. It does take time, and it's time that has to come from somewhere. But as long as I'm like engaged by it, we're gonna keep doing it, right? And if I quit getting engaged next week, the podcast will end next week, and I think that's a good thing. And we've had a lot of in a weird way, this is going to sound really strange. Having a podcast co-host is sort of like having a spouse. We definitely had to work through a lot of things together
Sure.
that you wouldn't think that you would have to do, but it is definitely, I guess, like having a business partner of sorts, and that's been a really big learning for me at least. I don't know how Scott feels about it.
Yeah. We'll have to get his take on it next time.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure. Well, he
I,
doesn't have kids, so
okay. He's disqualified.
yeah.
All right. We're going to move into the final segment called Cole's Advice Corner. So I'm going to ask you for some advice on a few
Oh,
topics. You
geez.
ready?
Okay, let's do it.
All right. So, what advice do you have for somebody that wants to start putting some content out there?
Hmm. I don't know. I don't listen to anybody. Like there's a lot of like advice and like wisdom about how to do this stuff, and we just actively didn't try to do any of it. And I feel like we've been relatively popular having done that as a consequence. Like
Yeah.
I think if like here's maybe this is the advice. If your goal is to be famous, trying to be famous is not a good way to get famous. Right? But if your goal is to like do something alternative to that and then like notoriety comes with it, that's awesome, right? And so like our goal has always been let's have really cool and interesting conversations with people that we want to talk to. We won't have anybody on as a guest that we find boring, right? And so I've had lots and lots of people that are much more well known than me try to get on the podcast. They're like, "I'm sorry,
Wow.
I just you're boring." Like I don't say they're boring to their face,
Right,
obviously,
right. Yeah.
but they are. They're boring.
If they're listening to
And
this,
and,
now they know.
and now maybe if they're parents, they will. Um, but yeah, and so like that's just kind of like we had kind of a like a loose set of rules that we just haven't broken from since we started, and they were kind of like our non-negotiables, right? And we stuck with it, and I think if we ever do break those, it would probably will like kind of go down in flames. But yeah, I mean, like just do what you're motivated to do. Don't do it to like again be the famous person dancing on TikTok or something.
Yeah. What advice do you have for somebody who is about to be a parent but still wants to focus on their career?
I feel like this is a very different question depending on a person's gender. And the only reason why I say that is because I've done a ton of work on this in my career, looking in this people. And so I think for guys, I mean, it probably shouldn't be this way. But I think we feel a lot more, we feel like we have a longer leash to be able to deal with this in terms of our career. I think
Yeah.
females, when they're negotiating this type of question, it is a much different question. And I think honestly, you should have some of those type of folks on the podcast because it would be really interesting to get their perspectives on it. Because I think that it's very tough being a working mother and feeling kind of like you're being successful on all fronts. I think I always call it's like squeezing the balloon, and air pops out the other side of the balloon. It's really tough to make it work all around.
Sure. What is the best advice you've ever received?
About like being a parent or just in general.
Anything.
Oh, geez. I'm really terrible at listening to advice too. So this is a tough one.
Maybe you didn't follow it, but it just sounded good at the time.
Yeah. I don't know. You always hear like don't go to bed angry. I think that's a good one.
Hmm.
Like in a marriage.
I do think
Don't
that's a
go to
good
bed
one.
angry.
Sure. What advice would you give to your former self?
There's a lot. I don't know. I was kind of a piece of crap in the past. So I'd probably
Don't
be
be.
less of that. That would be it. Just be less of that all around.
Don't be that. Okay, that's good. All right, last question. So by the time this podcast comes out, I think my daughter will probably be like 5 months old. So
Oh,
what advice do you
congratulations, man.
thank you. What advice do you have for me as the father of a 5-month-old daughter?
Yeah, I mean, this is actually there's a longer answer here, but the I feel like at every stage with the children, given I don't have like teenagers yet or anything, so I don't know what that is like. But for the time of which I've made it up to with my kids, there's joy to be had in every stage. I'd actually say the stages that you have been at so far, those are very hard. like they're like it's really cool when they start to make expressions. It's really cool when they start to use words. It's really cool when they start to be mobile. It's really cool when they can start like learning to like do things like go to the potty or put your shoes on or like that kind of stuff like that is all really cool, and that's all ahead of you. Right. And so at this point what you're enjoying is like there's beauty and vulnerability, right? That you've got this little thing that has that cannot take care of itself, and it needs you, and it just loves you relentlessly. Or at least I hope it loves you relentlessly. My kids love me.
Yeah, seems
and
to.
and so like that's what you got to enjoy, because that it's not always going to be that way, right? But there's going to be joy at every stage, and so you've got a lot to look forward to, but you are having a really cool time right now too.
Yeah, appreciate that. Well, Cole, this has been a great conversation. Where can people go to learn more about you or connect with you? Is there anything that you want to share, promote?
Yeah, I mean, if you're into people analytics, definitely check out the company I work for, Orgnostic. And especially if you're into people analytics, listen to our podcast. It's called Directionally Correct. Read some of the articles. I've got a pretty popular Substack page as well. And then just like if I don't know if you're into parenting stuff, yeah, I got nothing for you. Sorry.
People
Listen,
analytics are nothing, everybody.
yeah, keep listening to this podcast. This is the best thing I've seen.
Okay, appreciate that. I think that their listeners would agree. You're a great father. You obviously have a lot of love for your kids and a lot of love for being a father. I think that's all anybody can ask for. So
Well, thank
we
you. Thanks,
appreciate your
man.
time, Cole. Thank you very much. And yeah, we'll be in touch.
Absolutely.
All right.